I hate the word submission, and ironically, so does my husband. You see, he's my biggest cheerleader in ministry, and he doesn't manage my calling, he doesn't speak for me, and he doesn't feel threatened by the way that God uses me. But here's the truth: I don't hate submission when it looks like Christ. I don't hate submission when it looks like mutual sacrifice, when it looks like encouragement instead of permission, when it looks like someone laying down power, not tightening their grip on it. And today I want to teach you 3 ways submission does look like and 3 ways it absolutely does not look like, because submission didn't start dirty. We made it that way. And this matters because the word the Bible uses for submission does not describe a chain of command. The Greek word Paul uses means to voluntarily order yourself in love for the sake of unity and mission. It was never meant to describe silence, and it was never meant to erase agency. It was never meant to turn one adult image bearer of God into having authority over another. And let me be clear, especially in marriage, a spouse is not your boss, a spouse is not your supervisor, and a spouse is not your mediator to God. A spouse is your partner. Submission is talked about all throughout Scripture, directed at believers and leaders, communities, even Christ himself. But marriage is different because this is the place where the misuse does the most damage. So here's what submission does look like. Submission does look like partnership, two people walking together under Christ, not one person walking ahead and the other trailing behind. And it looks like shared discernment, shared prayer, shared decision making. Submission also does look like mutual sacrifice. Both people yielding, both people listening, both people willing to lay something down for the good of the other and the calling that is placed on their marriage. And submission does look like Christ: strength under control, power laid down willingly, authority used to serve, not to silence. But submission does not look like control. I've heard women say things like, my husband doesn't let me, or my husband won't allow that, or I'd have to ask my husband's permission, but I think he would say no. And every time I hear that, my stomach drops, because you're not a child and you are not an accessory. You are not someone who needs permission to obey God. You are his partner. Submission does not look like silencing a woman's voice. It does not look like speaking for her instead of listening to her. And it doesn't look like shrinking her calling so someone else can feel more comfortable. And submission does not look like dominance dressed up as spirituality. I've seen marriages where one spouse is naturally more decisive and one more yielding, and that dynamic alone is not a problem. Temperament differences aren't theology. The problem starts when decisiveness becomes unquestioned authority and yielding becomes expected compliance, when leadership is assumed instead of shared, when "this is how God designed it" is used to shut down conversation instead of invite wisdom. I've seen this in church spaces: men answering questions directed at their wives, men acting as translators for women who are fully capable of speaking for themselves, and men discouraging education, careers, or ministry because a woman's calling feels threatening instead of God-given. All of it wrapped up in spiritual language, all of it justified as biblical. That's why submission feels dirty. Because for many women, submission hasn't meant safety. It's meant shrinking. It's meant disappearing. It's meant being told God would never ask that of you. Here's what scripture actually shows us. Jesus submitted constantly, and he was never silenced, never diminished, never erased. If submission meant silence, Jesus would have stopped speaking long before the cross. Instead, he submitted by laying down power, not by demanding it, by serving, not controlling, and by inviting partnership, not enforcing hierarchy. That's the submission that I believe in. Because when submission is taught without mutuality, it becomes a dictatorship. And when this goes unchecked, it becomes control. And when control is spiritualized, people get hurt. Submission was never meant to protect power, it was meant to reflect Christ. And Christ never used authority to shut people down, he used it to lift people up. So when women recoil at the word submit, it's not because they want to reject scripture. It's because they recognize harm when they hear it dressed up as obedience. And that recognition is not rebellion, it's discernment. Because real submission doesn't erase partnership, it makes partnership possible. And it doesn't silence women, it creates space for both voices to be heard. And until the church is willing to name how this word has been misused, until we stop pretending the harm hasn't happened, submission will keep feeling like a dirty word. Not because God designed it that way, but because we did.